continue to engage in learning, particularly if they're in a hybrid, they would be really following that at-home synchronous and asynchronous portion of that hybrid model. And we've had situations this school year where maybe one cohort can still continue to come to school, but the other cohort can't. So that other cohort in that particular class section would spend 14 days really in that at-home synchronous, asynchronous portion of the hybrid model. And the question about specialists, we're still working through that. And what we're trying to do is be really inclusive of the perspective of our specialists, and really trying to work collaboratively to come up with something that is sustainable, but that most importantly provides our students with an engaging learning experience. Team members, anything you want to add to that? Okay, keep moving. So one of the questions that's come up often is, around what Wednesdays will look like. And one of the pieces that we know as we move forward, in order for our educators to really be able to effectively do what we're asking them to do, that Wednesdays have been and will continue to be a day where we'll need to create space for teacher planning and preparation, because we're really asking teachers to create 2 consecutive days of in-person learning and 2 consecutive days of asynchronous and independent learning for students that are in the opposite cohort. So with that, we really want to utilize Wednesdays as time for those things to happen. And also those are times where grade level teams are coming together as well to ensure that there's consistency in what students are experiencing at a particular grade level from classroom to classroom, and that we're meeting state standards. So as you're hearing that and thinking about what the expectations for learning will be, with hybrid students on the at-home days and distant learning academy students, students will continue to have their morning meeting option. Students will get clear expectations around the work that they need to be able to do and put effort forth on and complete each day. And we'll also continue to create opportunities for small group and whole group instruction throughout the week, and that will even continue to occur on Wednesdays as well. And from a standpoint at the last piece there around, you see this language of multilingual learners. That's the language we use here in St. Louis Park. And at a state level, you probably frequently see this referred to as English language learners. And know that if you're a student or family who has a student that's receiving special education services, that those services will still be provided based on each child's IEP, and that our multilingual students will continue to receive language development and appropriate and intervention when necessary. So as we're thinking about this, and I talked about this a little bit as I was reflecting on Wednesdays and how we're trying to utilize Wednesdays so that staff are providing our students engaging educational experience. But we're continuing to want our staff to engage in self-directed professional development and guided professional development. We have a professional development day coming up on November 2nd, or November 3rd, excuse me, where we will be engaging in learning connected to the strategic direction of our organization. And in addition to that, really continuing to strengthen our staff's muscles and being able to facilitate effective learning for students in a hybrid model and in a distance learning academy model. And within those opportunities for staff preparedness, really working with grade level peers at the site level, and then on district professional development days, really trying to work more broadly across the system to ensure that we're prioritizing state standards as well. Before I transition to the next slide, is there anything any team members would like to add to anything I've shared so far? Are there any questions in the comments that you all are seeing show up right now that we should take some time to address?
Yeah, I am seeing a number of questions just around, I understand that there's a lot of questions specific to, can we get a specific listening session just for PSI so that people don't feel compelled to say, I have questions just about PSI, but I don't want to take the time here. So I do appreciate people just recognizing that there might be unique questions to that. So a coffee with Corey but maybe more than a little teacup, might be a little bit more of a extra big jug. So I can't answer that because I'm not Corey. But so just know that
Corey,
that's,
would you be willing to just maybe just share your thinking around how families can engage and ask questions that they have, as it relates to this transition, specifically from an immersion standpoint?
Yeah, so thanks, Superintendent Sai. So similar to the other schools, once we know numbers of students that are opting for the distance learning specific section, that just like the other schools, we'll be looking at how do we best serve the students who are in the hybrid as well as in the distance learning section. And so from an immersion standpoint, that we will continue to look for opportunities for students to utilize the 4 domains of language: reading, writing, speaking, and listening, for both the times that we're synchronous or live in both models, as well as for the times when we're asynchronous and have activities on Seesaw or other platforms. So in particular, if people do have specific questions, I'll look at my schedule for tomorrow and see if there's a time we could potentially do a session. However, feel free to reach out to me too via email or, and I'll stay on towards the end. We do have our reading night at 6:30, so I'll have to jet shortly before that. But
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions that you all see coming up in the chat right now that we should address? Or
the other ones that keep coming up is just a separate listening session. That can we have one that's more specific on the distance learning model and one that's more specific on the hybrid? And I think you're kind of answering them throughout, is that there's more of a framework. And then I'm seeing pieces of within the hybrid model. Does it mean that they're really getting 2 full days of in person? But then does that mean that the other 3 days for the hybrid students are all those 3 days asynchronous, so not live? Is that kind of the trade-off? And it sounds like depending on the student, maybe that's already happening, but for others, it sounds like maybe that when they're at home, they're kind of getting that live piece at home. Would that no longer be happening?
Okay. Yeah. Would any team members like to maybe speak to that a little bit about what we're working towards as it relates to the at-home day of the hybrid model and what families can expect? And I can even go back to that slide if it would be helpful.
I can share a little bit about the differences, I guess, and I'll try to be succinct. And I appreciate the positive feedback that I've gotten from families around the work that the teachers are doing, and I echo that. And I will also add to the comments that came out from listening sessions that Superintendent Osai did with our teachers, is that it's not sustainable. So I think that there's been a lot of work that some of our teachers have done around with the webcams and trying to do having the students in front of them, having the students at home, and then also the cohort C when they're at home, is that they're trying to teach to 3 different groups, hence the reason for the academy. And then now, how are they still trying to have the higher level and keep those high expectations with both groups? So yes, I think that the model and really trying to be consistent throughout all of the elementaries was the idea of having the in-person with the 2 days, and then the other 3 having the asynchronous opportunities. But as Superintendent Osai said, the Wednesdays really having that time to collaborate and have standard base, high level rigor to be able to have those solid lessons. So that regardless if they're live in front of you or you have students at home, that there were solid quality lessons that were either put out by Seesaw or in front of students, that they were going to be high quality for full day lessons. And so that was the plan. But even as I shared it out with some of my teachers felt more comfortable about wanting a little bit more than just the morning meeting. That is still the requirement. Every morning there would be morning meeting, even on Wednesday. So that would still be the touch point every day. So I will say that the minimum requirement across, from what I'm hearing, and Corey, you can correct me, would be that every morning it would be a morning meeting in the hybrid model, and then it would be 2 days of full instruction in person, and then 3 days would be the asynchronous. So that was the minimum. If some teachers are feeling that they could do a little bit more other ways, that is something that certainly we won't discourage, but I am hearing that sustainability part of it is how do we make sure that it's I think, but I also heard Superintendent Osai say, I'm hearing groups of teachers and how they're being creative about how they're making that happen. And I also believe it depends on how numbers sort of, how it all shakes out too. So.
I would say to add to that too, what we're recognizing is that by the nature of having half of the students in class, that we are able to differentiate more for the students when they're in front of us, for those students that will be choosing to be in the hybrid model. And so by the nature of having in many of our classes 8 to 15 students, depending on the days, that we are able to tailor education differently than what we could do with student class size of up to 30. So I would say that many of our teachers are finding that they're able to go at a little quicker pace with the students in front of us, and we're able to tailor the needs of those kids.
And at times, many of that when they are home on the other days, we've had some of our like intervention teachers able to meet with them in small groups or at times too. So I think it will just kind of vary and depend, or if group projects are happening on those days, that providing times for students to get together virtually on those times too. So I think those are the ways that we can collectively be creative about how that will look.
Great.
And to add one more thing, I also believe our team discussed that we have an opportunity in that full day hybrid model to better prepare students for what their at-home days would look like. Right now, we know that trying to get everything in during that in-person time, it's a challenge to prepare them to know what their tasks are or what the plan is for the days they're at home. And we see that as a definite opportunity to make sure that we're really connecting the kids.
Thank you for that. Thank you. The other piece that we've received some questions about, but wanted to really just use this opportunity to remind families that we recognize that we have a lot of district issued devices and access points in the hands of students, and that sometimes things don't always work the way that you would like them to, and that our information systems and technology department has set up a link that you can go to and request support, or a number that you can call. And one of the pieces I should have said when we started is that these slides will be available to the community on our district website after this meeting. So don't feel like you have to try to write all of this down, and just know that if there are things that are coming up, if devices aren't working, that please call and utilize these resources so that we can get those devices back working properly, or get you a new device if we're unable to repair that. Because we know that within the hybrid, we're asking students to engage quite a bit through the use of those devices, and recognizing the importance of that to student learning. We want to make sure that they're working properly. And from a school operational readiness standpoint, specifically as it relates to recess, and let's just start there, is that as we're moving forward, in order to keep students safe, we're going to be creating zones. And I'm going to stop talking here and I'll let the experts, our elementary principals, talk more about this. I'm a secondary educator by trade, so I'm really, what do they say, a fish out of water as I talk about, recess, because just that we don't do recess at the secondary, but specifically know that we're going to be having different zones. And one of the pieces that I wanted to mention and just put a put an advertisement out there for is that we're currently in the process of hiring staff. So we're needing to add staff in order to safely implement this full day hybrid. And I would encourage anyone that's on this call that if you have time in your day and you have a strong love for kids and outdoors and recess, that you consider looking at one of those part-time positions. Because if for some reason, if we're unable to fill positions and get the staffing in place, it will create a significant challenge in our ability to offer this full day hybrid model. So I'm going to just pause there and let our elementary leaders and elementary team members just talk more about how we're going to be working to keep students and staff safe during recess.
Superintendent Osai, you did a much more eloquent job than what I typically do. I just do shameless plugs and encourage people to consider working with our schools. And so some families have asked, could I potentially work only on the days that my kids are there? And so if we could find someone that from cohort A that wants to work in cohort A days and someone from cohort B, I think we could make that work. So if anyone is considering that, what I will say is following MDH guidance, that we will not be mixing classes. So if we have 3 third grade classes and we have half of each of those classes there in the cohort, we will have 3 separate areas on the playground. So the students won't be coming together. So right now we're working with our staff to partition our outside area into 6 different zones. And so for each of those zones, we will need a different supervisor. And that supervisor would stay with the kids, hopefully for an extended period of time. So that's something that we're looking at right now, how best to do that in a safe way for everybody.
And one of the pieces that also, I know we spent a little bit of time talking about it during the 4:30 information session, was the wearing of masks during recess. And we are currently discussing that, looking at CDC and MDH guidelines and expectations around that. And in addition to that, really learning from other school districts that have been in full day hybrid models since, for longer periods of time than us. And, there's what we're seeing is that there's data on both sides that would support it. We recognize the need to make sure that students are having mask breaks during the day. There's information that would support those types of things occurring outdoors, but we also don't want to take any unnecessary risks. So we're taking all of that into consideration, and I believe that in a very short period of time, we'll be able to more accurately articulate what your expectations can be for your child while they're at school during recess regarding the wearing of masks. Did anybody on the team want to add anything to that? Okay, great.
Superintendent, I am seeing a few questions though about lunches. And so at this point, what we're looking at from a physical standpoint is most of our cafeterias are currently being utilized during the day. However, even so with the social distancing guidelines, we would only be able to have about 30 students eating there at a time. So at this point, we are looking at it being very likely that the students would be eating in the classroom under supervision.
Thank you for that. Any other questions that you're seeing coming up that we should address right now?
I think clarification, saying classes will stay in their own zone during recess is different than recess being socially distanced. Yes, the plan, the expectation would be that we would still be socially distanced outside of recess.
Within those zones. Correct. Yeah.
There also was a question earlier just about for any of the in hybrid, will activities and lessons for the asynchronous, will that still be shared with parents through Seesaw? And yes, all of our elementaries will be using Seesaw as the mode of communication with students and how to get the materials and lessons and things like that out.
Excellent. Okay. So, another school operational readiness kind of question that we've gotten is, will transportation routes change? And, one of the things that we recognize right now is that as we make this shift, that there could be some fluctuation, right? So as we have maybe more students opting into distance learning or vice versa, that potentially shifts the numbers of students that need to access transportation. And because we have very strict parameters and expectations around the number of students we can have on buses, if, for example, we have more students opting into full-day hybrid, it could cause us to have to add additional routes to safely transport students. So similar to much of what we've shared this evening, once we are able to get confirmation around registrations regarding Distance Learning Academy and full-day hybrid, we'll better be able to determine what, if any, change will need to occur regarding our routes. The piece that I want to just remind everyone of is that if for some reason there is some change in the routes, that certainly you'll receive an email, and you can, as you currently can, certainly access the parent portal that provides you all of your route information and time. So know that as we continue to move forward, we'll have more clarity about this, and it'll just really be it'll be dependent on our ability to meet the expectations around social distancing on buses. So either, having to add buses, or in situations where there may be a particular route that, families have opted into DLA, and we maybe have 1 or 2 students that we would potentially figure out how to reroute that student to be fiscally responsible in our transportation. So what we would like to do now is just open it up for some conversation, and we actually are doing pretty good. We were hoping to have approximately about 15 minutes for some, more general questions and answering. And there are 2 ways that we can do this. If you want to continue to put your questions in the chat, you can do that, or if you would like to use the raised hand feature under the participants tab. Raise your hand, and then one of our team members will acknowledge that hand, and we'll take your question.
One question that I've seen a couple of times is around in-distance learning. How much like synchronous, or like, will they be with a teacher? How much time online? And so it's kind of worded in different ways, but that is, so we understand in hybrid, at a minimum, they would be in front of a teacher really 2 days during the week and 3 days asynchronously. But if I was going to opt into distance learning, what would that look like? How much time can I expect to be in front of a teacher virtually, even in a synchronous way, versus asynchronous lessons being put out? And would that really still be like a seesaw? But how, and is it grouped like a class size, whatever, but what does that kind of look like? And I'm not really sure the answer to that, but I'm
sure. With a team member, and I'm really thinking about design team members right now. Is there anything that you all would like to add to just provide some context? And I see Nathan. Thank you. I know you're going to say something. One of the things that I just want to frame this in is that we've made this shift to the Distance Learning Academy because, we wanted to ensure specifically that students in cohort C are receiving a very rigorous and engaging educational experience. And we also wanted to create a sustainable model that allows our educators to be at their best. So when we have a dedicated, a teacher to a particular section or sections of students, what I believe families can expect is, a higher level of synchronous opportunities or live opportunities, but that's really dependent upon grade level, right? Because if we think about kindergarten students, like their stamina is, being able to engage in the screen is less than a 5th grader, right? So it's hard for us right now to give you a specific percentage or number, because what we know is that it will be more, but it will vary from grade level to grade level just based on student stamina and where they are developmentally. So Nathan, I know you were going to say something. Sorry about that.
No, I actually think you answered it very similar to how I would, is that as we put this plan together and we see the numbers that will elect to be a part of this, and staffing that goes into it will help us determine what that daily delivery looks like. So that's where within our timeline, I think sometime within that, we'll be able to determine exactly what those days might look like, that portion of synchronous versus asynchronous, but I don't think we're there yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great, thank you for that.
Yeah, and even though I said like, I don't know what that will look like, I do think that there's a piece of it that was our thought around when we started in distance learning. There was intentionality around, we knew everybody would be in distance learning at some point, even just with our Wednesdays. So the ideal to that is, how do we build the stamina for that and knowing developmentally around it? So the piece also is knowing we don't, I mean, even for myself, sitting in front of a screen for 4 hours is not ideal. And so what does that look like is an important piece. And then how do we make sure that we still have engaging lessons? And so we know kids can sit in front of at least my own son can sit in front of a computer for 8 hours, depending on what's in front of that screen. But I don't want that. So how do we make sure that it is still connecting with their peers, because that's an important social part as well, and their teacher, but that it is still aligned and has the same high expectations. It's just going to look different. So, yeah.
Thank you.
But it still would be, my understanding to the design team is that it still would be the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, correct? So the Wednesdays still would be an asynchronous day, because Wednesday is a collective thing. We are being intentional about having that Wednesday across the board as a building and district to collaborate and connect, because we don't want like a school within a school to be completely separate, was my understanding, but the design team would know.
No, absolutely. And I maybe I could have been clearer. I tried to address that a little bit earlier as we talked about staff preparedness and the strategy that we were using to ensure that, recognizing that teachers are having to create the 2 in-person lessons and then the 2 lessons for students at home, and wanting to make sure that there's consistency and alignment around at a particular grade level regarding that access students are having to state standards. So yeah, Wednesdays will continue to be, regardless of if you're hybrid or distance, more of an asynchronous experience, and morning meetings and there will be some small groups and stuff, but it will be very similar regardless of distance or hybrid. Thank you for that. Any other questions you're seeing in the chat? Or are there any hands raised? I'm sorry, I can't see just because I'm sharing my screen right now.
You could probably stop sharing the screen if that helps us see everybody, but I don't know if you need to go back to a slide.
Yeah, well, all right. If I need to go back, I'll just jump back on.
So I see a question about masks for lunch, and it would be similar to how we're currently doing breakfast. Kids would be socially distanced in the classroom. They'd wash their hands prior, have to stay 6 feet apart, but yeah, they would take their masks off for being able to eat. And we're currently working on supervision for that and what that might look like.
I don't see hands.
I've seen a question about instructional delivery and about just the consistency of our programming. What I'd just like to say is that really whatever program you choose is really going to be a family preference. Both of these programs, what I can say is that what both have in common, we are going to provide the same high quality instruction for whichever program you choose, whether that's the Distance Learning Academy or the full-time hybrid model. The instruction isn't going to be much different. We're going to be offering the same curriculum. What will be different will be whether or not you value having your child in a face-to-face setting and want that hands-on experience with the curriculum, or whether you want them to be in that experience online. And but as far as the curriculum goes and how they're engaging in that with teachers, they'll be following the same pace. They'll be following the same standards, and the instructional strategies on the most part will be the same, other than adapted to meet the needs of students in an online setting. So I just wanted to clarify that, because some were asking about the consistency of delivery. So I just want you to know it's really about your personal preference in that way.
And I also just wanted to add, because I've seen a couple comments around, when we first started off in distance learning, it was really good. And then when we went to hybrid, that's when things kind of trailed off. And I think that just speaks to the volume, that when teachers are able to focus on not as many different modes of trying to deliver education, or anything for that matter, at least for myself, I can say that, that's when it gets hard, the sustainability of that. And so when a teacher is able to focus on just distance learning, and that's their goal, is those students, without a doubt, that will be a much better delivery, a much better focus. And that will be our plan. Similar with hybrid. If my focus is hybrid education and not having to deliver to 3 different cohorts, it will be, in my opinion, but our expectation across the board is that it will be a better experience for everybody. So that's our outcome. That's our expectation.
Okay. Other questions in the chat? Let's see. So there was a question about, can you talk more about how SPED services will be handled in DLA? Is there anything more that can be done? And one of the things that we're looking at, and I referenced this earlier, is that depending on how everything turns out from a registration standpoint, that there may be a need to hire staff, shift staff to support special education needs within that distance learning academy. We want to be really mindful of that, though, knowing that each child has a case manager that they've been working with, that is very familiar with their IEP and supporting them. But it is our intention to, as we move to the DLA, to be able to better support our students, both those that are receiving special education services and those that aren't. Just recognizing that there can be more of a focused approach on our students that are learning at a distance. So there's a question about minimum and maximum DLA classroom sizes. So as we think about that, what we want to be able to do is follow the similar classroom or class size targets that we have for what we consider in-person classes. So I don't quote me on this, and I'm just going to try to take this from memory, based on what I know about our class size targets and sections. But generally at kindergarten, we try to have, 23, no more, between like 23 and at the max 25 kindergartners in a section. We know that that's with 2 adults, because in every kindergarten classroom, we have the classroom teacher and instructional assistant. At first grade, we also stay, our target is around 23, and I intentionally use the word target because as you're going to a target, you're not always on that bullseye, but you may be a few under or a few over. At second grade, our target is 24. At third grade, our target is 26. At fourth grade, our target is 28, and at fifth grade, our target is 29. So as we move forward and think about our distance learning academies, we would be shooting for similar class size targets, right? So let's just play that out. If we had at a site, if we had a kindergarten DLA enrollment of 9 students, that wouldn't, based on our class size targets, support a full-time teacher in kindergarten. So what we would be doing there is looking at what other creative ways can we support that learning in the least, that would cause the least disruption, right? So could we do some sort of combined grade level section. Well, I guess that would really depend on what first grade numbers we're at, right? So know that we will be looking at all of that with the idea and mindset of trying to create the least disruption possible for students and staff. Team members, is there anything you want to add to that? Okay, and I hope and again, don't quote me on those targets. In my mind, I'm just, understanding that our staffing is 90, almost 95% of our budget, that we really try to stick to those numbers, because that really drives our expenses. What else? Anything else you all seeing in the chat that I recognize we have 4 minutes left, but is there anything else you all are seeing that we should call out right now?
I think you answered it somewhat, but one of the questions was, so will there be like combined grades then in the distance learning, and is that?
Yeah, I think that there's a possibility. Yeah, there's a possibility. It'll depend on, again, the registration and the numbers. And I also I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that, we currently have teams of teachers at different sites at grade levels that are doing some tremendous collaboration and coming up with very creative strategies to support entire grade levels, right? Like being really creative in how they do that. So, it could be that, as we move in this and we look at the numbers, that there are some creative things that come up. I know that our staff is going to be, really trying to focus on minimizing the disruption, but in places where, those creative things won't work, we'll either band grade levels, or when we have the enrollment to have single grade level sections, we'll do that as well. So I think we probably have time for one more. I don't see any hands right now. What do we want to? And I noticed that if you didn't see in the chat, that there'll be a coffee with Corey tomorrow from 3:30 to 4. So he said it looks like he'll send out a link in the morning via Seesaw. Thank you, Corey, for doing that. And I think he probably had to run to head to the author's night.
And I'm seeing that there's a number of questions about start time for DLA. And I think, again, we have a start time for the day of school. But I also have heard, depending on, if we have to combine, that we could do a morning meeting with everybody together, and then they might say, like, kindergarten, we're going to start your lesson at this time, and then we'll do first graders at this time if it is a combined class. So I think, again, it's that creative nature of whoever is teaching it. If they have to do a combined class together, that maybe they separate the timing of the lessons. So you might have one teacher teaching 2 classes or 2 grade levels because of the size, but they differentiate it by actually splitting the times that they're teaching them. But again, I think there's just a lot of different things. So to say, like, let's make sure everybody starts at a certain time, I don't know. I'm not sure, but I'm just seeing the comments about time. So.
Thank you for that. Nathan, I saw you take yourself off mute. Were you going to say something, or that was an accident? Maybe it was an accident. Okay. I just want to make sure that if you had a question, you were going to address. So I just want to thank everyone for taking time this evening to engage in this information session. And again, the slides that were shared earlier will be available on our district website. And we will continue, recognizing that this is ever evolving, that we will continue to provide you with up-to-date information as more and more of these things start to get figured out. And if for some reason there are additional questions that you wanted to ask that you weren't able to get to this evening, I would really encourage you to reach out to your principals at your site. I'm always available to answer questions as well. And we'll continue to work collaboratively as a community to first and foremost keep our students and staff safe, and secondly, ensure that they have a engaging and rigorous educational experience. So thank you for your time this evening, and I hope that you all have a great night. Take care.